Well, good day there. Welcome back to the channel. Well, many of you are familiar with pinhole photographer Nick Dvoracek. Nick has been involved in pinhole photography for several decades at least, and I got to know Nick through the F295 Pinhole Photography Discussion Forum. A lot of people have come and gone in the pinhole photography world, myself included. I'm not nearly as active as I used to be, but Nick, one thing about him is he's consistently been shooting pinhole photographs and, equally importantly, making pinhole cameras. And what Nick's forte is making these templates on adhesive paper. In fact, he wrote me a two-page letter, handwritten letter on the backs of two of these adhesive templates. You peel the backing paper off and you stick it to some kind of cardboard and you can make your own pinhole camera. And Nick sent me one of his pinhole cameras made from a whiskey box, and I thought it would be fun to look at it, see how it's built, and then I'm going to load some film in it, and eventually I'm going to get outside and try to shoot some pinhole photographs with Nick's pinhole camera. Stay tuned. So along with the camera and the templates for making cameras and the letters, of course, he also sent me a print. This is just a lovely portrait of an old house in his town. I just love this kind of documentation that Nick does with his photography. And if you're unfamiliar with Nick's blog, I will leave a link down below to Nick Dvoracek's blog, but he has been methodically and faithfully working with pinhole photography for decades, and his is one of the most consistent long-term blogs in pinhole photography online. Well, this is Nick's Evil Cube camera. It uses 120 roll film. Starting in the back of the camera here, it has an opening for viewing the frame numbers and a nice closing pull shutter for that, and also it's captive. It doesn't come out of the camera. And then on top we have some nice wooden wine bottle corks, or maybe these are whiskey bottle corks, that are used as the winder knobs for the camera. On the sides we have a couple of viewing dots for aiding in viewing where the framing is. So there are two pinholes. There is a center pinhole on the bottom right here, and this is, I believe Nick said, is F200. And then there is an upper pinhole that's used for straightening out parallel lines in buildings. So essentially it is like front rise. If you use this one, you can straighten out the tall buildings, similar to what we see here, I think, in Nick's photograph of Jansen's Bar and Restaurant here, where you can kind of see the lines of the building have been straightened so they don't go upwards in single point perspective. The camera comes apart in several pieces, and you might notice that there are two slots here for the winding knobs. The front half of this piece here, fits underneath the knobs but on top of these little cardboard discs, so that acts like a light seal. Once the front has been removed, then the two knobs pull out like this, and these are wooden pegs that have been glued into these cork centers on these knobs, and then he has carved some slots in these pegs to fit into the 120 roll film spools, and then he's attached these cardboard discs to them that are colored black for light tightness. So you have two of those. And then once the knobs come off, you can see the spool here. There's an empty 120 spool on this side, and you would have another one here if you had film in it. So once the knobs come off now, it comes apart like that. So basically we have the front here, the middle part with the film, and then the back. So we have two pinholes taped on the front for our center and our front rise, and then we have in the sides these little flaps that act as light baffles, and each spool, one goes on this side and one goes on this side. There's our take-up spool right here. The film winds around the back, these taped up edges of cardboard. It makes a nice smooth transition, and this is a square format 6 by 6 centimeters, the Evil Cube pinhole camera. And the nice thing also, he has a piece of foam core in the bottom where he has attached a 1/4 blind nut, so you can attach this to a tripod, which is very cool. Well, okay, so I have a roll of Arista EDU 400. There we go. Okay, the Evil Cube is loaded and it is ready for frame number 1. Okay, so I'm going to use the Pinhole Assist app. I first want to set the f-stop to f200 according to what Nick says. That's what it is. Then I want to go to my film type, and I'm going to select Arista EDU 400. And then you want to go up to set reciprocity, and I'm setting it as Arista EDU 400 so it knows the reciprocity failure curve. So it should say set film reciprocity as Arista EDU 400. Well, so almost all of my cameras, I'm using the Joby GorillaPod ball head on all my tripods. So I have the Joby GorillaPod adapter plate on the bottom of the Evil Cube, and I'm ready to go out now. Well, the challenge of using this particular film is it supposedly has really bad reciprocity characteristics from what I've read. It's FOMA brand, and so I've chosen kind of one of the worst films for pinhole. So I got some reciprocity data off data sheets, a couple of them, and they don't really agree with each other, so I'm going to have to just wing it and see what we get. Well, I'm at the old Special Collections Library. This used to be the original main branch library in Albuquerque, and I'm interested in the architecture here. So we're going to set up our pinhole camera. Actually, I already got it set up. I'm going to use the upper pinhole here, a little bit of front rise. I'm going to do a couple seconds. Well, okay, this is a nice old building, beautiful old building. We were here a couple weeks ago for picking up a couple typewriters from here, and we looked at the printing press museum they had here. But the architecture is just beautiful. I just am not confident right now with my exposures on this film because the app I'm using as a light meter is giving me like fractional second exposure times, which I don't know, maybe that's true, but I'm just giving it a couple seconds each way, so it's just sort of an estimate, a guesstimate of the exposure. At this point, I'm not really using a meter per se. Well, this is a little plaza near Edith and Central, this little old building. The actual courtyard is closed now because of homeless people getting in there, but the building itself is really old, and I think it's kind of cool. I'm going to take a picture of it. All right, get this camera lined up. Use the upper pinhole. Okay, frame number 7. Well, I'm over here by the Alameda Bridge, North Albuquerque by the Rio Grande, and I'm just interested in this kind of shot right up here on the abutment to the bridge. Kind of looking at this shot here. Well, I really like this deadwood here down by the Rio Grande. It's a lot of fun to come down and shoot this stuff. I really like these dead trees and fallen logs here down by the Rio Grande. I've always admired them as subjects for black and white photography. Well, I'm trying to get a sense of near and far, so I'm very close to these branches here, and then I'm trying to get a little bit of the river and the sky beyond it. Well, here we are at the banks of the Rio Grande on a wonderful sunny afternoon in the autumn. And I finished up this roll of film. I'm not all that convinced that the exposures were right. I think most of them might have been overexposed according to my meter, but I can't really do sub 1 second exposures very accurately. So I'm just going to probably reduce the development a little bit, and that's the next question, is what kind of developer do I use? I have Rotinol and I have HC110 at home. I'm going to use one of those two, maybe Rotinol. Might be worthwhile. Okay, well, it's time to wind the rest of the roll. Feels like it's now detached. Okay, we will take off the nifty rubber bands that Nick provided for us. And the front of the camera. Okay. All right. Well, there you go. A roll of film needing to be developed. Thank you, Nick. I appreciate the camera. Okay, let's do the calculation. So this bottle, this tank holds 485 milliliters total, and I want 1 plus 50 dilution. So what we have is 1x plus 50x equals 485. 485 equals 51x. X equals 485 over 51, which equals 9.5 milliliters. 9.5 milliliters of rotenol, and the remainder, 485 minus 9.5, is 475.5 of water. My water temperature and chemicals are a little bit warmer than what I wanted. They recommended 68 degrees, 11 minutes. But it's actually 70 degrees, so you can pop this into the massive development chart. It'll tell you that my actual development time needs to be about 9 minutes and 50 seconds. And that's really great, being able to convert the development time for a different temperature. So we're just doing a little sneak peek of these negatives while they're in my drying cabinet. Most of them look pretty decent. There's a couple that are a little dense, and there's one here that's very thin. Something happened here, but most everything else actually looks pretty good. So I think the temperature correction on the massive development chart from 11 minutes down to 9 minutes 50 seconds, I dropped it to 9 minutes. Because I was afraid that I had overexposed the film in the camera, because the Pinhole Assist app was giving me like sub 1 second exposure times, supposedly with reciprocity already figured. And it looks like I kind of hit the ballpark. Not perfect, but it's ballparked. So we're going to let the film dry for a few hours, and we'll get the negatives out, cut them up, put them in sleeves, and maybe we camera scan them and see what we get. Well, let's walk through these photos, shall we? Well, this one here is of the Special Collections library. I always like that roof line, the special architecture of it. These are, by the way, are not super great scans. These are just quick camera scans on a light table. But I really like this, and there's, obviously some granularity visible in the film emulsion. That's what you would kind of expect with a 400-speed film developed in rotenol. And of course the edges of the subject are soft like you would expect with Pinhole, but the tones are rather nice. Okay, so this next one is another view of the roof line of the library, looking from underneath the porch on one side. It's a nice view. I like the shadow of the tree along the wall, and then you can barely discern the shadows of the dark wooden beams in the right-hand side, which is nice. Then the next image is of an old house that's across the street from the library. This is 112 Edith Northeast. This is my great-grandparents' house, my grandparents' house. I used to stay here almost every weekend when I was young, and it's now owned by someone else. It used to be a lawyer's office. The sign, those two white posts in the lower left corner, was a sign for a law office. Now it's just owned by a private person. And I did use the front rise, the upper pinhole, so the verticals are a little more parallel with each other. This is that old building down on Edith south of Central, next to that courtyard that was locked, an old adobe or stuccoed building, and I just like the irregular look of the building itself. I did use the front rise pinhole. I like the mottled sky in the background, and it's just kind of a cool shot. And then this next one is an interesting shot. This is taken right on the corner of the Artichoke Cafe, I believe, on the corner of Edith and Central, and you're looking through one display window at the corner out the other side of that corner window, and you're seeing this indoor plant that you can kind of barely make out. That's inside the building, but then you're also seeing a reflection from behind me on the first window of the scene that's behind me. So there's sort of like multiple things going on in this photograph. A corner window, an interior, and a reflection behind me all going on. It looks like a multiple exposure, but it's not. Okay, this is over by the Alameda open space area by the Rio Grande at Alameda Boulevard. This was that walking path that goes underneath the Alameda Bridge, right on the edge of it. Really like the way this came out, and you can see on the left side, the upper left, the branches of that bush are swaying in the wind like you would expect with Pinhole. And then this is that deadwood fallen tree, pretty harsh contrast. You can still see some of the engravings that someone carved a heart in it and some kind of initials. Yeah, kind of an interesting shot. This is along the riverbank, looking through some foliage at the river and the bank beyond it. And this one here is shooting through some reeds that are swaying in the wind. I really like this shot. So it has this kind of mid-tone graininess to it, which I really like. There's a lot of motion going on in this picture. And finally, this one here is just a straight shot looking across the Rio Grande from one side to the other. I had a couple images that didn't really come out all that good. 10 out of 12, not a bad hit rate at all. Well, it was a lot of fun using this pinhole camera that Nick Dvoracek made, and especially knowing that he designed this camera as well. And of course, Nick has designed a lot of other homemade pinhole cameras and has made the templates available for you to print them out on adhesive labels, stick them to cardboard, like packaging, like what Nick does, reusing packaging to make these nifty little cameras. And he's been using these for decades. And it was a real pleasure for me to use one of his cameras in kind of the same mode that Nick does, which is documenting his hometown. I did a little bit of that myself. This was a print, again, that Nick sent me in the package, and what a great shot that is. I'm always amazed at the quality of Nick's work. This was a good opportunity also for me to get involved with some film developing. Pinhole with film is different than pinhole with paper negatives, because paper negatives don't have reciprocity failure under normal light conditions, and most black and white films do, with the exception of like Fuji Acros is much better, but I didn't have any of that. But in the meantime of trying to struggle with metering and not trusting my metering app and not really sure about the development and having to figure out, well, I'm going to reduce the development time, and hopefully it seemed like it worked out. My pictures weren't too bad. I got some usable negatives. That's nice. And also, I found in my bookshelf behind me 3 more rolls of film, of medium format 120 film that I need to process. I wrapped them in some aluminum foil just to keep them out of the light. But anyway, this is going to spur me on maybe to doing a little bit more roll film, even though I kind of am a paper negative pinhole guy. But thank you, Nick, for pushing me toward trying out one of your roll film cameras. It really was a lot of fun. And I'll leave a link down below to Nick's blog. You guys should really check it out. Well, until next time, I wish you the very best. Stay creative and have yourselves a great day. Bye-bye for now.